This week's parsha is the most important parsha in the entire Torah. You may ask, why is this week's parsha the most important in the entire Torah? Well, let me tell you. Parsha Vayeira covers some of the most famous stories in the entire Torah. The three men or angels visiting Avraham, the re-promise of a son to Sarah, the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his daughters being saved, Lot's daughters' strange relations with their father, which leads to the birth of the Davidic line, Avraham repeating the Sarah is my sister situation, the birth of Isaac, Ishmael and Hagar being expelled and then saved, and the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. But none of that is why this is the most important parsha in the Torah. The reason this is the most important parsha is because it answers a nagging question that we all should have been asking last week. Last week, when God tells Avram, Lech Lecha, we're left to wonder, why Avram? Of all the people in the world at the time, why did God choose Avram? We know Noah was picked because he walked with God, but the Torah seems to have nothing to say about why Avram. In fact, the Torah tells us nothing at all of Avraham's backstory before we meet him at age 75. Sure, the Midrash fills in some gaps with some amazing story about Avraham's youth, but that's the Midrash, not the Torah itself. But there's a line this week that's easy to miss that I think comes to answer this exact question. After the three men/angels inform Avram and Sarah that they will have a son at this time next year, they take leave and start out towards Sodom. God says, "Shall I hide from Avraham the thing which I intend to do, seeing that Avram shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed by him?" And now comes the critical line. "For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do tzedakah umishpat." There it is. That's why God chose Avraham. Because Avraham is someone who will command his children and his household after him. That's the toldot of Terach that we spoke about a few weeks ago, the idea that family is the way to transmit ideas. But then we get the details of what Avraham will transmit to his descendants, and that's the key. That's what Terach was missing. They shall keep the way of the Lord to do tzedakah umishpat, righteousness and justice. Why is that such a big deal? Well, if you think about it, those two concepts are almost impossible to combine. If you have a case in front of you where a rich person is suing a poor one, there's one of two things you could do. You can judge fairly, not taking into account who's rich and who's poor. That's justice, but is it righteous? Or you could have mercy on the poor person and rule in their favor, which would be righteous, but not justice. Avraham figured out how to do both, and he will teach that to his descendants. Sounds great, but how do you combine those two things? Well, there's a source in Avot de Rabbi Natan that tells us how Avraham combined them. In the case above, what Avraham would do is he would give the poor person tzedakah, charity, in the amount that the rich person was suing him for. Then he would hear the case fairly. If mishpat, justice, says to rule in the rich person's favor, okay, so the poor person hands over the money you just gave them and is no worse off than they were before. If justice says to rule in the poor person's favor, great. The rich person is no worse off and the poor person now has your extra charity. That's how you combine the two. That's what Avram was doing before Lech Lecha. That's the behavior that God saw in Avram to know that he was the one. And that's how we, Avraham's descendants, need to behave, combining tzedakah umishpat, righteousness and justice in everything we do. That is one reason why this is the most important parsha in the entire Torah. But the other reason is that the most important piece of Torah is whatever piece of Torah you have in front of you right now. Shabbat Shalom and Am Yisroel Chai.